While mending electrical lines in my parents' basement, the electrician went deathly pale, visibly shaking. He whispered, "Gather your possessions and flee now. Do not tell your parents." I stared down at the basement in terror and swiftly called the police. Have you ever stared into the face of a betrayal so deep, so twisted, that it ripped apart every single thing you thought you knew about your own family? My blood ran colder than I ever thought possible the moment that flashlight beam cut through the darkness of our forbidden basement. Because what it revealed wasn't just a family secret. It was undeniable proof they wanted me dead. And the they? My own father and stepmother. I'm Jacob Caldwell, 24 years old, freshly graduated from college, and for a long time I felt like a forgotten puzzle piece in my family's picture, one no one quite wanted to fit into place. I used to think the greatest tragedy of my life was my father leaving my mother for another woman. Oh, how wrong I was. The real pain, the chilling realization, it began on an afternoon that seemed utterly ordinary, when the electrical system in our old Portland house flickered and died. I found myself descending into that basement, a place I'd been forbidden to enter my entire childhood. The air down there was thick, damp, and heavy with the smell of rusted metal, each creaking step on the old wooden stairs echoing like a grim warning. My heart hammered. Then, in a fleeting moment, as the electrician swept his flashlight beam across the room, we both froze. He trembled so hard he dropped his tools, and I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. There, laid bare before my eyes, was the secret my family had hidden for years. A truth powerful enough to destroy everything. But to truly understand that moment, to grasp the sheer horror of it, we have to go back. Back to when I was just a boy, living in that 3-story craftsman house in the suburbs of Portland, where the first cracks in my life began to appear. I grew up in a comfortable middle-class home. We weren't rich, but we never wanted for anything. My father, Samuel Caldwell, he was a tall man, deep voice, and almost intimidating air of authority. His sharp eyes, they could cut through anything, except it seemed me. He was utterly consumed by his construction company, blueprints, endless meetings, grand visions of expansion. I truly believe his ambition built an invisible wall between him and my mother, Monica. My mother, she was the warmth in my life. Soft brown hair, a smile that felt like autumn sunlight. She loved me. I knew it in my bones. She'd spend hours telling me fairy tales, stroking my hair when I was scared during those wild Portland storms. But her marriage to my father? It was a house built on sand. Beautiful from a distance, but one big wave, one strong current, and it would all crumble. I still remember those nights, lying in bed, a 10-year-old boy clutching his worn-out teddy bear. My heart would constrict, squeezed tight by the angry whispers and frustrated grumbles that echoed through the thin walls. Mom in the kitchen, eyes red, Dad complaining about money, about work. It was a suffocating tension. Then the wave hit. I was 10. They officially divorced. That morning is burned into my memory. My mother sat on the sofa, a small suitcase at her feet, her hands trembling as she pulled me into the tightest hug. "Jacob, you are everything to me," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. But the court didn't see it that way. My father had the stable job, the nice house, promises of a better life. My mother, with her meager part-time job, she didn't stand a chance. She moved a few hours away to live with my grandparents. As that door closed behind her, it felt like a part of my heart, a vital organ just tore right out. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching her figure fade, a horrible, gut-wrenching question blooming in my mind. Had I done something wrong? Had I made her leave me? From that day, I changed. I wasn't the laughing, playful boy anymore. The world felt fragile, like everything I loved could vanish in an instant. My father? He was physically there, but he never noticed the shift in me. He was too busy rebuilding his life, consumed by contracts and business. To him, I was just a small, minor detail in his grand picture, someone he didn't need to pay much attention to. And that in itself was a kind of pain. Just 2 years later, when I was 12, Serena walked into our lives. My father met her at some business party, and within months, she took the Caldwell name. My new stepmother? She was much younger than my dad, barely in her 30s, with glossy blonde hair and a smile that always felt, well, insincere to me. She had a way with words, a charm that could make my father laugh, something I hadn't seen since my mother left. But her gaze? It was always cold, like she was looking through me, not at me. "Jacob, are you okay? And she'd ask, but there was never any genuine warmth in her voice, just a hollow question to fill the silence at dinner. My father changed after Serena. He became almost dependent on her, letting her decide everything. From choosing schools for their two children, John, 12 years younger than me, and Lily, 14 years younger, down to the most trivial things, like what to buy for dinner. John and Lily, my half-siblings, they became the undeniable center of this new world my father and Serena built. And they were adorable, I won't deny it. John loved soccer, always asking me about games, and Lily would snuggle up during cartoon marathons. But no matter how much I tried to connect with them, I couldn't shake the feeling. I was an outsider in my own home. I felt like a ghost, silently drifting through familiar hallways where my mother's laughter once echoed, now filled with a crushing sense of estrangement. Our 3-story craftsman house, the one I grew up in, it felt utterly different. Still beautiful from the outside, with its big windows, gray-tiled roof, and wild garden. But inside, the air had grown heavy, as if an invisible, suffocating fog had settled in. And the basement, or the cellar as we sometimes called it, that was the place that truly unsettled me. Deep underground, accessible by an old wooden staircase that vanished into darkness. The musty smell, the constant drip of water, the bone-chilling cold, it always made me shudder. As a kid, I was curious, of course. But Serena, the moment she moved in, she forbade me from ever going down there. "It's dangerous, Jacob," she'd said, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. "It's not a place for kids to play." My father never objected, and I, a scared 12-year-old boy, never dared to question her. But every time I passed that door, an inexplicable unease pricked at me, like something sinister was lurking in the shadows. The years that followed were steeped in loneliness. I learned to hide my true emotions, to paste on a smile when Serena asked about me, to nod when my father droned on about his company's future. Deep down, I just knew I didn't belong. My only solace, my lifeline, were those phone calls with my mother. Monica, though far away, was a beacon of light in my darkest days. On weekends, I'd pour out everything: school, my dreams, the sorrows I couldn't share with anyone else. "You're stronger than you think, Jacob," she'd tell me, her voice a warm embrace through the phone. Thankfully, my father never forbade me from contacting her. Maybe that was the one thing he did right by me. Those conversations with my mother were a balm for my soul, but they couldn't fill the gaping void left by the divorce. I missed the old days, our family around the dinner table, my mother humming in the kitchen, my father actually hugging me and asking about my scribbled drawings. Now, the dinner table was Serena's perfectly arranged domain, filled with polite but utterly empty words. John and Lily would laugh and play, my father would nod along, and I'd just sit there, trying to swallow bites of food that tasted like ash. It was clear I was no longer part of their family. Serena always found subtle ways to push me to the sidelines. She never said it outright, but I felt it in her dismissive glances, in the way she'd shower John and Lily with attention but rarely ask about me. Once, I overheard her telling my father in the kitchen, "Jacob's grown up. He'll manage on his own." Her voice was soft, yes, but the coldness, the utter indifference, it cut straight to my core. My father just mumbled in response. And in that moment, I knew. He had chosen her side. My teenage years bled into each other, quiet and unremarkable. I threw myself into school, devoured books, and clung to dreams of a future far away from that suffocating house. At 18, I finally escaped, moved out, started college in Portland, and tasted freedom for the first time. But even after leaving, the memories of that craftsman house, and especially that dark, forbidden basement, they still haunted me. I didn't know then that years later, that very basement would unlock a horrifying secret, one that would force me to see my entire life, every painful moment, in a completely different, terrifying light. Now, at 24, I've graduated, a degree in hand, and a jumble of unformed ambitions swirling in my head. I live in a cramped apartment downtown, where the scent of coffee from the shop below mixes with the endless city hum. It's small, just enough room for a bed, a desk, and shelves overflowing with books. I'm independent, working part-time at an old bookstore, and getting a modest allowance from my mother. Monica, always my anchor, still sends me money every month, tucked inside hastily. Written letters full of fierce encouragement. "You'll find your path, Jacob," she'd write. I keep those letters in a small wooden box, a constant reminder that someone out there genuinely cares. I visit her often, driving a few hours to the small town where she lives with my grandparents. Those weekends, they're a balm for my soul. sitting in her warm kitchen, sipping hot tea, listening to her stories from the old days. I feel like myself again. A Jacob who doesn't have to hide his emotions or brace himself against a hostile world. But with my father and Serena, that's a different story. I kept my distance, only visiting the old craftsman house when John or Lily texted asking me to come over. My relationship with my father felt like a thread, frayed and stretched to the point of snapping. Serena, on the other hand, played the role of the perfect stepmother to perfection, all polite inquiries and carefully calculated smiles. But I knew, beneath that polished facade, there was nothing but an icy distance. Then a few months ago, things started getting strange. I can't pinpoint exactly when, but my body just stopped feeling like my own. Sudden, skull-splitting headaches would strike, like someone was hammering behind my eyes. Some mornings I'd wake up disoriented, the world tilting around me. A persistent, inexplicable fatigue clung to me, dragging me down. I'd always been healthy, rarely caught a cold, so these symptoms, they worried me deeply. I went to the doctor, underwent a battery of tests, brain scans, blood work, the whole 9 yards. But the results? Nothing. "It's probably stress from overwork, Jacob," the doctor said, handing me a prescription for supplements and telling me to rest more. I took the pills religiously, but nothing changed. The exhaustion persisted, an invisible shadow trailing me everywhere I went. Around that exact same time, Serena suddenly became attentive. Phone calls from her started coming more frequently, her voice syrupy sweet over the line. "Jacob, it's been a while since you came home. Why don't you join us for dinner this weekend?" She'd coo. It left me both surprised and deeply suspicious. Part of me, the naive part, wanted to believe she was sincere, that after all these years, she genuinely wanted to mend our fractured relationship. But every time I heard her voice, a chill snaked down my spine. Something felt profoundly off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Despite my suspicions, I started visiting my father's house more often, partly due to Serena's relentless invitations, partly because I genuinely missed John and Lily. Family dinners were held in the familiar dining room, bathed in a deceptive warm yellow light, the air thick with the aroma of food. But every time I sat at that table, a strange, unsettling feeling crept over me. The food, though meticulously prepared, often had an odd, indescribable taste. Not spoiled, no, but something metallic or chemically off. I once asked Serena about a particular dish, but she just smiled that sweet, hollow smile and said it was a new recipe. My father, of course, paid zero attention. He'd eat quickly, mumble about work, then bury himself in his phone. John and Lily, oblivious, would laugh and chatter about school. I was the only one there, spoon in hand, feeling like I was swallowing unease with every single bite. That feeling, that dread, it intensified whenever I stayed overnight. Some nights, I'd jolt awake to strange, unsettling sounds echoing from the basement below, a metallic clanging, like someone dragging something heavy across the concrete floor. Then a sharp, acrid smell, like incense mixed with something chemical, would drift up through the crack under my door. I'd lie there, heart pounding in my chest, straining to listen, convinced I wasn't dreaming. But when I'd creep out of my room, the hallway would be dark and utterly silent, as if it had all been a figment of my terrified imagination. The next morning, I'd invariably try approaching the basement door, but it was always locked tight, as if meant to keep out anyone too curious. I even asked Serena about it once, trying to keep my tone casual. "It's nothing, Jacob," she said, her eyes flicking over me like a sudden cold flash of lightning. "Just for safety." Those visits to my father's house began to take a real toll on my health. The headaches became excruciating, so frequent and intense I'd have to lie down in the dark, clutching my head. The dizziness, the pervasive fatigue, an unnamed heaviness clung to me like a shroud. I started meticulously tracking my symptoms, desperate to find a pattern, a cause. Was it stress, as the doctor insisted? A poor diet? But deep down, a chilling instinct began to bloom. Something was profoundly wrong in that house. In those meals. In Serena's cold, calculated glances. I desperately wanted to believe I was imagining it all, that I was blowing my loneliness out of proportion into something far more sinister. But the instinct clung to me, a persistent whisper in my mind, urging me, "Be careful." I tried to tell myself to stay calm, that I was just being overly sensitive, but the whisper grew louder. A few weeks crawled by. I tried to push it all away, focused on job interviews, extra shifts at the bookstore, my calls with Mom. But every time my mind drifted back to that old craftsman house, my heart would race. I started avoiding visits, inventing excuses to decline Serena's dinner invitations. Then, one Saturday afternoon, while tidying my tiny apartment, I remembered. I'd left some important stuff at my father's, a folder of university documents, an old camera from a photography class. I hesitated, knowing they were away on a family trip, a trip I hadn't been invited to. A familiar pang of hurt. I told myself it didn't matter, not anymore. I just needed to get my things and leave. The Portland sky that day was heavy, bruised with clouds promising rain. I drove to the suburbs, to the house I once called home. Parking in the driveway, an eerie quiet settled over everything. No Lily's laughter. No Dad's grumbling. No trace of Serena's saccharine yet cold voice. Just silence. I unlocked the front door with the spare key, and the only sound inside was the steady, ominous ticking of the wall clock. I went straight to my old room. On the dusty desk, I found the folder and the camera. As I reached for them, my eyes caught a framed photo on the bookshelf. My father, Serena, John, and Lily, all beaming in some summer park. I wasn't in the picture. A chill snaked down my spine. I stood there, frozen, my chest tightening as years of being pushed to the margins, a feeling invisible, washed over me. It was heavy, suffocating. I shook my head, trying to banish the familiar pain, and stuffed my things into my bag. I was ready to leave. That's when it happened. The lights in the house flickered, then died. A sharp click echoed, and the house plunged into absolute darkness. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Outside, rain began to patter, but there was no storm, no lightning. The electrical system had simply failed. I pulled out my phone, fumbled for the flashlight, and checked the breaker panel. Everything looked fine, but still, no power. Damn it, I couldn't just leave the house like this. I found a local electrician online, Mike, a middle-aged guy with a warm, gravelly voice. "I'll be right over, kid." "Just stay calm," he said. He arrived about 15 minutes later, toolbox in hand. After a quick check, he shook his head. "Breaker's fine. Must be an issue with the main system." He looked at me. "Do you know where the main electrical box is?" My heart suddenly raced. I pointed toward the basement door. "Down in the basement," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I'm not sure what it's like down there. I don't go down often." Mike raised an eyebrow but didn't press. He walked to the door, inspecting the shiny, heavy-duty lock. "Locked up this tight? You got treasure down there or something?" He joked. I could only manage a weak, trembling smile. In my mind, Serena's warning echoed, sharp as a blade. "It's dangerous, Jacob. Don't go down there." As a child, I'd obeyed, not out of fear, but to avoid conflict. But now, standing before that door, a cold shiver ran through me. Something wasn't right, and I knew, deep down, I couldn't keep avoiding it. "Should we wait for my dad?" I asked, my voice barely a tremor. "I mean, he might know more about the system." Mike shrugged, his hand resting on the doorknob. "You can wait if you want, but if we don't fix this now, the house will be dark for days. I just need to check the box. It won't take long." He was right. I couldn't leave the house like this. I took a deep, fortifying breath and nodded. "All right. Go ahead and check it. I'll come with you." Mike nodded. He pulled out a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters from his toolbox and positioned them against the rusted iron lock. The grinding screech of metal on metal pierced the quiet, sending goosebumps crawling up my skin. With one strong, decisive twist, the lock snapped open. The basement door creaked open, its hinges groaning like a long-imprisoned lament. A wave of bone-chilling air rushed out, carrying a thick, musty odor, mixed with something else. Something sharp, acrid, like dried blood blended with the cloying remnants of burning incense. My throat tightened and a prickle of dread crawled over my skin. We descended the old wooden staircase step by agonizing step. The weak beam of the flashlight barely pierced the thick, suffocating darkness a few feet ahead. Mike swept his light around the room. It grazed stained concrete walls, dusty wooden shelves, and dark corners I didn't dare look at directly. "Electrical box is probably around here somewhere," he muttered, but his voice trembled slightly, as if he too sensed the profound wrongness of this place. I couldn't respond. My gaze was transfixed, drawn to a corner of the room where my own flashlight beam landed. On a rough wooden table covered with a black cloth sat a collection of horrors. Half-burned black candles, their wax hardened into long, dripping streaks like dried tears. In the center, a small glass jar filled with a dark red liquid glinted sickeningly under the light. I stepped closer, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst, and caught a sharp, unmistakable smell. Blood. Next to the jar was a crude cloth doll, no bigger than my hand, pierced with rusted pins. On its fabric face, crudely stitched in red thread, was a single word: Jacob. My breath caught. The air in the room seemed to tighten around my throat, suffocating me. "Good God," Mike whispered, his flashlight beam freezing on the table. I turned. He was backing away, his face ashen in the dim light. "What the hell is this?" he asked, his voice shaking violently. I could only nod. Words failed me. On the table, there was also a small wooden box, its lid open, revealing tiny, milky white animal bones. Bird or rat, perhaps, mixed with charred paper talismans covered in strange, unsettling symbols. My head spun. It felt like I'd stepped into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I swung my flashlight to the wall, and my heart stopped dead in my chest. There, taped to the concrete, was a photograph. It was me, an old college picture from a school picnic. I was smiling in it, carefree and naive, utterly unaware that this photo would end up here, in this basement. Around the picture, a circle had been drawn in vivid red paint, surrounded by bizarre, ominous symbols, as if someone had deliberately marked me. Nearby, on a wooden shelf, lay an open notebook, sprawled, filled with frantic, handwritten scrawls. My name, Jacob Caldwell, repeated over and over like a relentless whispered curse. "You need to call the police, Jacob," Mike said, his voice now barely a whisper. "This isn't normal. I've never seen anything like this." He took another step back, his eyes wide with unadulterated fear. I wanted to say something, anything to reassure him, to reassure myself, but I couldn't. The pieces in my mind, those vague instincts I'd dismissed, they all began to click together. A horrifying picture, forming with sickening clarity, one I didn't want to believe was real. The headaches, the dizziness, the inexplicable fatigue, they weren't random. The meals at my father's house, that strange metallic or chemical taste. Serena's probing gaze as if she were sizing me up, waiting for something. The nights I heard noises from the basement. The times I'd seen her slip down here in the dead of night when the whole house was asleep. All those details, all those fleeting moments I'd dismissed as imagination, now stood out, stark and clear as day. Serena. My stepmother wasn't just distant. She was doing something far, far more sinister. A dark ritual, a curse, a plot to destroy me. I stood there, frozen. My hand, trembling violently, clutched my phone. My heart pounded, threatening to burst through my chest. I wasn't just the abandoned son, pushed to the edges of the family. I was the target. The prey of something dark, malevolent, and utterly incomprehensible. I looked back at that crude cloth doll with my name stitched on it, feeling as though someone were physically squeezing my heart. Why? Why was Serena doing this? And my father, did he know? Was he part of this twisted scheme? I pulled out my phone, switched on the camera, and started taking pictures of everything. The table with the candles and glass jar, the doll, my photo on the wall, the notebook filled with those chilling scrawls. Each snapshot was a piece of evidence, a desperate attempt to preserve the truth before it could be erased. I didn't know what I'd do with them, but I knew I had to act. I couldn't let fear consume me. Mike stood behind me, still reeling in shock. "Jacob, we should get out of here," he urged, his voice desperate. This isn't safe." I nodded, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. A single question echoed in my mind, relentless and chilling. Why do they want to destroy me? I thought of my father, how he'd become a stranger over the years. I thought of Serena with her fake smiles and cold, dead eyes. And John and Lily, my innocent siblings, likely oblivious to the darkness that enveloped this family. I turned and climbed the stairs, each step heavy, as if I were dragging an entire world of dread behind me. Mike followed, silent, shaken. When we emerged from the basement, I closed the door, but the sense of horror, of dread, clung to me like a shroud. I had just uncovered a secret I could never unsee. The Craftsman house, once my home, now felt like a meticulously laid trap. And I, without a doubt, was the prey. I stood there, phone clutched in my trembling hand, staring at the horrifying images on the screen. Each photo a stark, undeniable reminder of the truth. My legs felt like jelly, as if the floor beneath me was crumbling. Mike, the electrician, stood a few feet away, clutching his toolbox, his face still frozen in shock. "Jacob," he said, his voice strained, "you need to call the police. Right now." I nodded, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I dialed 911. A calm female voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? I cleared my throat, fighting to keep my voice from stammering. I'm Jacob Caldwell. I'm at my father's house in the Portland suburbs. I just found something terrifying in the basement. There are things down there. I think it's related to some kind of cult. Something dangerous. Please come quickly. My voice faltered, but I managed to describe it all. The doll, the jar of blood, the symbols. The operator paused, asked for the address, and then Mike, sensing my distress, gestured for the phone. I'm Mike, the electrician, he said, his voice surprisingly steady. I can confirm what he's saying. Everything down here is very wrong. You need to send someone now. Mike's urgency seemed to cut through any lingering skepticism. The operator instructed us to wait outside, not to touch anything. Mike and I stepped out into the front yard, the gray sky spitting a light drizzle. I clutched my phone, the photos still open on the screen, as if they were the only proof keeping me from doubting my own sanity. Mike said nothing, just stared down the street, the tension radiating from him. Less than 20 minutes later, a police car pulled into the driveway. 2 officers emerged, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a younger woman with sharp, observant eyes. Officer Harris and Officer Lopez. You're Jacob Caldwell? Harris asked, his hand resting on his belt near his holstered gun. I nodded, trying to keep my voice from trembling. Yes, that's me. I called 911. There's something really strange in the basement. I need you to check it out. Harris raised an eyebrow, exchanging a glance with Lopez. Strange how? Lopez asked, her tone laced with a hint of skepticism. I couldn't blame her. My story sounded like something from a bad horror movie. There's a doll with my name on it, symbols on the walls, and a jar that looks like it's filled with blood, I said, pushing my phone, open to the photos, towards them. Harris glanced at them, but still wasn't entirely convinced. Could be someone's prank, he said calmly. Or some weird art project? We'll check it out, but stay calm. Blood rushed to my face. A prank? This isn't a prank. I snapped, my voice hardening. I'm not imagining this. Please, just go down there and see. Lopez nodded, a flicker of something in her eyes. All right, lead us down, she said. I took a deep breath, pushed open the front door, and guided them to the basement. Mike followed, but he kept his distance, clearly wanting no part of going back down there. The wooden stairs groaned under our weight. The musty smell mixed with that acrid incense hit me again, sending a shiver through me. I switched on my flashlight, illuminating the path downward. When we reached the basement, I pointed to the wooden table draped in black. Harris and Lopez swept their flashlights around the room, and I watched their expressions shift. Skepticism vanished, replaced by outright shock. Harris paused at the table, his light falling directly on the doll with my name. Jesus, he muttered so low I barely heard him. Lopez stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the glass jar, then moving to my photo on the wall, encircled in red paint and strange symbols. She exchanged a look with Harris, and this time there was no trace of doubt. This isn't a prank, Lopez said, her voice grave, hushed. We need to seal this place off. Harris nodded, already pulling out his radio to call for immediate backup. I stood there, feeling like the entire world was collapsing around me. The fear, the gnawing suspicion I'd carried, was now chillingly validated by the officers' stunned faces. This wasn't my imagination. Something horrific, truly evil was happening. Right here. In the house I once called home. Soon, an entire investigative team swarmed the house. They brought cameras, evidence bags, equipment I couldn't even identify. They photographed every single thing, the table, the doll, the jar, the notebook. A tall officer, Detective Carter, introduced himself and asked me to recount the entire incident. I sat in the living room, their flashlights the only illumination in the power outage-darkened house. I told him everything, the headaches, the dizziness, the strange taste in the food, Serena's sudden, suspicious attentiveness. I described the noises from the basement, her cold stares, my gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. Carter took careful notes, nodding occasionally, his eyes sharp and unblinking. Do you think anyone in your family is involved? He asked, his gaze piercing. I hesitated. I think it's Serena, I said, my voice trembling. She always forbade me from going to the basement. And the meals, I felt worse after eating here. I paused, thinking of my father. My dad, I'm not sure, but I don't think he's entirely innocent either. Carter nodded, offering no comment. He told me to stay in touch, promising a thorough investigation. The house was temporarily sealed, yellow tape stark against the basement door. As the police cars drove away, I stood in the front yard, rain soaking my shoulders. A profound mix of relief washed over me. Finally, someone believed me. But it was quickly overshadowed by dread. The gruesome truth was just beginning to unfold. My family, or what was left of it, wasn't just broken. It was hiding a dark, malevolent secret, and I was, horrifyingly, at its very center. That night, I couldn't go back to my apartment. I drove straight to my mother's house a few hours away. When I arrived, she and my grandparents were in the living room, bathed in the warm glow of a single lamp. I told them everything, from breaking the lock to what I found. My mother listened, initially skeptical, her eyes wide with worry. "Jacob, are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos. When they saw the cloth doll, the jar of blood, my photo on the wall, they were stunned into silence. My grandfather, usually a man of few words, just shook his head, muttering, "I've never seen anything like this." My mother pulled me into a hug, tears streaming down her face. "My boy," she whispered, her voice choked. I sat there in her arms, feeling like a raw, shattered piece of my heart had finally found a place to rest. Several days passed. I stayed at my mother's, trying to find some sliver of peace in her warm kitchen and comforting stories. But every time I closed my eyes, the images from the basement flooded back. The doll with my name, the jar of blood, the red symbols. I checked my phone constantly, waiting for news from the police. Detective Carter had promised to follow up, and I knew they were investigating, but the waiting was agonizing. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure when or if I would fall. Then one morning my phone buzzed. It was Carter. "Jacob," he said, his voice grave, "you need to come to your father's house now. Your family just returned from their trip. We need you here for a confrontation." My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my ears. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I'll be right there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother looked at me, her eyes filled with worry. "Do you want me to come with you?" she asked. I shook my head. "I have to do this alone, Mom." She hugged me tightly, as if trying to transfer all her strength into me. As I drove back to the Craftsman house, Portland's sky remained a dull, mirroring gray. Pulling onto the familiar street, I saw my father's car parked in the driveway, several suitcases scattered haphazardly. They were back. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and heard my heart racing so loudly I could hear it. The front door was wide open, and my father's angry roar echoed from inside. "What is this nonsense?" he bellowed, clutching his phone. "Who dared to put police tape on my house?" I stepped inside. The air in the living room seemed to freeze. My father, Samuel, stood there, his face flushed with rage. Serena was beside him, her blonde hair neatly tied back, but I saw her eyes flicker with something unreadable when she caught sight of me. John and Lily, my younger siblings, huddled in a corner, looking small and utterly confused. "Jacob!" my father barked, his voice dropping but still razor sharp. "What the hell is going on?" Before I could respond, Serena cut in, her voice icy but meticulously controlled. "Richard, I've already called the police," she said, using my father's first name, something I rarely heard. "They said they're sending someone to explain. This must be a mistake. There's no way our house is being treated like a crime scene." My father waved his phone, his voice thick with frustration. "I just spoke to them. They said there was a report from some witness about our basement." Before he could continue, the wail of police sirens filled the air outside. Detective Carter walked in, flanked by Officers Harris and Lopez. Behind them, another investigative team, carrying equipment, their faces stern. "Mr. Samuel Caldwell, Mrs. Serena Caldwell," Carter stated, his voice calm but sharp as steel. "We need your cooperation to address some serious concerns regarding this house." Serena forced a smile, but it was stiff, a brittle mask. "There must be a misunderstanding, officer," she said, her tone saccharine as ever. "We just got back from a trip. We know nothing about this." My father nodded, his gaze shifting between me and Carter. "Exactly. I want an explanation right now." Carter didn't respond directly. He gestured to me. "Jacob, can you tell us what you saw?" I took a breath, feeling the crushing weight of every eye in the room on me. I started speaking, my voice shaky at first, but growing steadier with each word. "I came here to pick up some things and the power went out. I called an electrician and we went to the basement to check. Down there I I paused, locking eyes with Serena, and recounted every single horrifying detail I'd seen. My voice trembled with tension. The room fell silent, the air heavy, suffocating. My father's frown deepened. Serena froze briefly, her mask slipping, before she regained her composure. "Jacob, what are you talking about?" my father asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "Are you making this up for attention, kid?" But I didn't back down. I pulled out my phone, opened the photos, and handed it to Carter. He held up the screen for my father and Serena to see. "This is what we found," Carter said, his voice flat. "And we need an explanation from both of you." Serena let out a brittle, unnatural laugh. "Officer, these are just spiritual items," she said, trying to sound dismissive. "A few things I used to pray for the family's safety. There's nothing dangerous about them." She looked at me, her eyes cold, but still clinging to that calculated smile. "Jacob, you've misunderstood. I'd never do anything to hurt you." Blood rushed to my face. I stepped forward, confronting Serena directly, my voice shaking with rage but resolute. "You're lying," I said, each word carved from my chest. "What did you do to me? The headaches, the fatigue, the strange taste in the food. It was all you, wasn't it? You wanted me to waste away, didn't you?" My father shot to his feet, his face crimson with anger. "Jacob, that's enough," he shouted. "You don't talk to your stepmother like that. This is nonsense, a stupid prank." But I didn't back down. I looked him dead in the eyes, feeling for the first time in my life unafraid of him. "Did you know about this, Dad? Or are you part of it too?" I asked, my voice low but sharp enough to cut. He froze, his eyes flickering, but he offered no answer. Carter raised a hand, calling for calm. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, we have clear evidence of a ritualistic setup in the basement with items specifically targeting Jacob. This isn't a joke. We need a clear explanation, or we'll have to proceed according to the law." Serena began to deflect, her voice growing frantic, cracking under the pressure. "I told you, it's just for prayers. I don't know anything about pins or blood." But the panic in her eyes, the tension, it betrayed her lie. My father stood silent, his hands clenched into fists as if wrestling with himself. I looked at him, desperately hoping for a moment that he'd say something, anything. Defend me, show me he was still my father. But he just lowered his head, utterly mute. Suddenly, more police sirens wailed outside. Another investigative team entered, carrying paperwork and an arrest warrant. Carter looked at my father and Serena, his voice cold as steel. "Samuel Caldwell. Serena Caldwell. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit premeditated murder." Another officer stepped forward, reading them their rights, while Lopez and Harris moved in, preparing to cuff them. Serena burst into tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. She struggled, screaming, "You can't do this. I didn't do anything." My father, in stark contrast, was silent, his face ashen, as if his entire world had just collapsed. As the police cuffed them, I heard soft, heartbroken sobbing from the staircase. I turned to see John and Lily standing there, eyes red and terrified, watching their parents being led away. Lily ran to me, hugging me tightly, crying into my shirt. "Jacob, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling uncontrollably. I held her, but I didn't know how to answer. John stood still, fists clenched, his eyes filled with a raw mix of anger and pain. As the police escorted my father and Serena to the cars, I stood frozen at the door, watching them disappear behind the flashing red and blue lights. Serena shot one last glance back, her eyes no longer masking her pure, venomous fury. My father didn't look at me, didn't say a word. My heart felt crushed, heavy with sorrow, but at the same time, a strange, undeniable wave of relief washed over me. The family I'd clung to for so long, the perfect facade of my father, Serena, John, and Lily, it was now revealed as something utterly rotten, steeped in lies and darkness. I stood there under the drizzling rain, watching the police cars fade into the distance. Carter patted my shoulder, his voice softer now. "You did well, Jacob. We'll keep investigating. Stay in touch." I nodded, but my mind was reeling. The truth was out, yes, but it left a void in me, part loss, part freedom. A few days later, the police were still sifting through the Craftsman house. Detective Carter called me, his voice serious, yet gentler now. "Jacob," he said, "we found some important documents in your father's house. Some of them concern you directly. We've contacted a lawyer, Mr. Collins. He's worked with your family before. You should meet with him." I gripped the phone tightly. "Documents about me?" A fresh chill ran through me. What other horrors were waiting? I agreed to meet Carter and Mr. Collins the next morning. Mr. Collins's office was in downtown Portland, a warm, inviting space with large windows and wooden furnishings. But when I walked in, Mr. Collins, a man in his 60s with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses, rose to greet me. His kind smile couldn't quite mask the gravity in his eyes. "Jacob, please sit," he said, gesturing to a chair across his desk. Detective Carter stood quietly in the corner, offering a reassuring nod. On the desk, a thick file, bulging with aging papers, some yellowed at the edges. "Jacob," Mr. Collins began, his voice deep and clear, "what I'm about to tell you may be hard to accept, but you need to know the truth." He pushed the file toward me, opening it to a page bearing the familiar signatures of my grandparents. "This," he continued, "is documentation of a trust fund established years ago by your grandparents, Henry and Eleanor Caldwell. The fund is worth approximately $2 million, and it's in your name. You will inherit it fully when you turn 25. I sat there stunned. $2 million? The air in the room suddenly felt impossibly heavy, pressing against my chest. I don't understand, I stammered. Why didn't I know about this? Mr. Collins sighed, pushing his glasses up his forehead. Your grandparents stipulated that you wouldn't know until you came of age. All documents related to the trust were sent to your legal guardian, your father, Samuel. He's known about it for years. His words hit me like a physical blow, a sharp, twisting knife to the gut. My father knew, and Serena, my cunning stepmother, she must have known too. And then, like the final, horrifying piece of a puzzle snapping into place, it all made sense. Every single thing that had happened. It had a reason. They wanted me dead. If I were gone, if I simply disappeared, that trust fund would fall to my father. And Serena, with her calculated greed, would undoubtedly find a way to claim it for herself. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, fighting to suppress the volcanic surge of anger and pain. Carter stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. We were investigating when Samuel and Serena began planning this, he said, his voice quiet but firm. What you found in the basement, combined with these documents, provides strong evidence of their motive. I nodded, my mind numb with the realization. My father, the man who once carried me on his shoulders, who taught me to tie my shoes, had chosen money over me. Serena, with her fake smiles and honeyed words, had made me the target of a sinister, murderous plot. My heart felt like it was being physically torn apart. Yet at the same time, a cold, hard clarity settled over me. All those years of loneliness, of feeling like I didn't belong in the family, now they made chilling, awful sense. As I left Mr. Collins's office, I carried a copy of the trust fund documents and a hurricane of emotions in my heart. On the way back to my apartment, I stopped at a small park, sinking onto a bench. Memories flooded in. My childhood when my grandparents were still alive. Grandpa Henry, with his white hair and warm voice, sitting on the porch, telling me stories of his youthful hunting trips. He taught me to tie knots, identify plants, and above all, that honesty was the most precious thing. Jacob, live in a way you're never ashamed of yourself, he'd said, his eyes shining with conviction. Grandma Eleanor, gentle as a summer breeze, would hold me close, softly singing old folk songs, cooking meals whose comforting smells I still remember. When my parents divorced, it was my grandparents who offered solace. Afternoons in the kitchen with Grandma, eating freshly baked cookies while she shared stories. When I was sad about my mother leaving, Grandpa would take me to the garden, showing me how to care for plants, as if to say that life goes on no matter how much it hurts. He passed away when I was 13, a sudden stroke. A year later, Grandma followed, leaving a void I thought could never be filled. But now, sitting on that bench, holding those trust fund documents, I realized something profound. They had never truly left me. This trust fund, this $2 million, it wasn't just money. It was their love. Their final, powerful shield left to protect me. Yet, with a bitter twist of irony, that very love had become the reason my father and Serena wanted to destroy me. I felt both agonizing pain and immense gratitude. Pain for the betrayal, driven by the darkest greed. Gratitude for my grandparents, who even in death had found a way to shield me. I felt as if they were watching me from somewhere, and I vowed then and there I would not let greed or betrayal destroy what they believed in me. That evening, back in my small apartment, I found myself drawn to an old photo album my mother had sent me years ago. I flipped to a page, and there it was, a picture of me with my grandparents, taken during a summer picnic. I was 8 years old, beaming, caught between their loving smiles, sunlight filtering through the trees. I touched the photo, feeling their warmth still lingering. "I'll live worthy of this legacy," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I won't let greed ruin what you believed in me." The months that followed were a whirlwind of court hearings and sensational headlines. The Oregon court began the trial of my father, Samuel Caldwell, and my stepmother, Serena, just a few months after their arrest. I didn't attend every session. I simply wasn't sure I had the strength to face them again. But I followed along through Detective Carter's calls and brief reports in the local news. The story of the Caldwell family, once a seemingly comfortable household in suburban Portland, became a public spectacle. "Murder plot in Craftsman home," one headline shrieked. "Cultic greed, horrifying secrets in the basement," screamed another. Each time I read those words, it felt like a physical squeeze to my chest. The trial dragged on, evidence meticulously presented day by day. The photos I'd taken in the basement were damning. Experts confirmed the liquid in the glass jar was animal blood. The symbols and rituals were complex, linked to an obscure, malevolent occult practice. My testimony, along with Mike the electrician's and Mr. Collins the lawyer's, painted a stark, undeniable picture. Serena was the mastermind, orchestrating those horrific rituals to harm me, to slowly poison me. My father, though not directly involved in the rituals themselves, was found guilty of complicity, for knowing about the trust fund and, crucially, for failing to stop Serena. On the day of the sentencing, I sat in my apartment clutching my phone when Carter called. "Jacob," he said, his voice steady, clear. "The court has reached a verdict. Samuel Caldwell has been sentenced to 25 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Serena Caldwell received 30 years for her role as the mastermind and for carrying out the occult activities." I stayed silent, letting his words sink in. 25 years, 30 years. The numbers echoed in my mind, but they brought no sense of triumph, no satisfaction. Only a profound, aching sadness, as if I'd lost something forever. The Caldwell family, once my father's misguided pride, was now a permanent stain in the eyes of the world. I hung up, sank into a chair, and stared out the window. Rain fell again, as if trying to wash away the last vestiges of the past. Time passed. I desperately tried to rebuild my life. I found a stable part-time job at a counseling center, all while preparing for graduate school. Gradually, slowly, the headaches and dizziness faded, as if my body instinctively knew the threat was gone. I stayed in touch with John and Lily, but each meeting was tinged with their visible pain. They didn't blame me, not directly, but I knew they were struggling, desperately trying to comprehend why their parents had done this. I tried to be there for them, but the distance between us felt unbridgeable. Then came my 25th birthday, marking exactly 2 years since that horrific discovery. I didn't want a big celebration. That evening, I drove to my mother's house. She and my grandparents had prepared a small party. The kitchen smelled of freshly baked cookies, and on the table sat a simple chocolate cake with "Happy Birthday, Jacob" written in white frosting. My mother hugged me, her eyes shining with joy tinged with that familiar worry. "You've really grown up, my boy," she said, ruffling my hair, just as she did when I was a child. My grandparents, though aged, smiled warmly, sharing old stories, trying to pull me back to those carefree days. I blew out the candles, cut the cake, and for a while, I laughed with them. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a birthday. It was the start of a new chapter, one finally free from the crushing weight of the past. The very next morning, Mr. Collins called, asking me to come to his office. I knew exactly what was coming. When I stepped into his office, he greeted me with that familiar, kind smile. On his desk lay a new file and a pale yellow envelope. "Jacob," he said warmly, "today is the day you officially become the legal beneficiary of the trust fund your grandparents left you. $2 million. All yours." He pushed the file toward me, explaining the legal details, but I only half listened. My mind drifted, back to those old days when my grandparents were still here, when I was a boy running through their garden. Then Mr. Collins handed me the envelope. "This is from your grandparents," he said. "They wrote it before they passed, instructing me to give it to you when you turn 25. I took the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. My grandmother's handwriting, soft and elegant, spelled my name on the front. "Thank you," I managed, my voice catching, emotions swelling within me. "Thank you for everything." That afternoon, I walked to a nearby park where the maple trees were just beginning to turn a vibrant, fiery red. I sat on a bench, opened the envelope, and began to read. My grandparents' words came alive, as if they were speaking directly to me. Dear Jacob, you are our greatest joy. No matter how hard life gets, no matter what challenges you face, remember that you are stronger than you know. We left this trust for you not just for a better life, but so you can live true to your heart. Live kindly, honestly, and never let darkness dim the light inside you. Love you forever, Grandpa Henry and Grandma Eleanor. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I smiled. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of release, as if I'd finally found a home. Not the craftsman house, steeped in darkness and betrayal, but a home within my own heart. My grandparents, though long gone, were still with me, guiding me through their loving words. A few weeks after my 25th birthday, a letter arrived at my apartment. From the Oregon State Penitentiary, the plain white envelope bore my father's scrolled handwriting, Samuel Caldwell. My heart raced. I sat at my small table, hands trembling as I opened it. The short lines, written in blue ballpoint, seemed like they'd taken immense effort to compose. Jacob, I know you don't want to see me, but I need to talk to you one last time as your father. I don't expect forgiveness, but please let me see you. You're still my son, Samuel. I read the letter over and over, each word piercing like a needle. Father. The word felt foreign, a ghost from another life. I thought of the years of his indifference, the times he chose work, chose Serena, chose money over me. I thought of the basement, the pinned cloth doll, the trust fund he and Serena were willing to kill me for. Part of me wanted to tear the letter into 1,000 pieces, burn it, erase him. But another part, a deeper part, urged me to face him one last time. Not to reconcile, but to close the chapter. To sever the chains. I spent several sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had the strength to walk into that room, look into his eyes, and say goodbye. Finally, I decided. I would go, not for him, but for myself. I needed to end the past to truly break free. I called the prison, confirmed the visit, and the next morning, I drove there, my heart heavy, but my resolve unshaken. The Oregon State Penitentiary, a grim, gray fortress of high concrete walls and barbed wire on the outskirts of the city. I passed through security, feeling like I was entering another world, cold, dark, filled with metallic echoes. A guard led me to the visitation room, a small space, white walls, and a thick glass partition separating me from the other side. I sat on a hard plastic chair, hands clasped tightly, fighting to stay calm. The door on the other side opened. My father walked in. I barely recognized him. Samuel Caldwell, the man who once exuded authority, now looked haggard, his hair grayer, face gaunt, eyes weary and hollow. He wore an orange prison uniform, his hands cuffed, but he tried to hold his head high, clinging to some last shred of the father I once knew. He sat down, picked up the phone, and looked at me through the glass. Jacob, he said, his voice cracking. Thank you for coming. I didn't respond right away. Just stared at him as if seeing a stranger. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice colder than I'd intended, sharper than I expected. He attempted a weak smile, but it faded quickly. I just wanted to talk. I want you to know. I never meant to hurt you. I let things go too far. His voice faltered, but I felt no pity. His words sounded hollow, like a poorly acted play. You knew about the trust fund, I stated, locking eyes with him. You knew what Serena was doing. And you didn't stop her. He bowed his head, his eyes red, but he didn't deny it. I was wrong, Jacob, he whispered. I got caught up in ambition, in what Serena said. I thought she was doing what was best for the family. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Family? You call that a family? You chose her. You chose money over me. He didn't respond. His head remained lowered as if my words were too heavy to bear. Then the door on his side opened again. Serena was let in. My blood ran cold. Her once glossy blonde hair was disheveled, her face harsh, stripped bare of the polished facade that had hidden her true nature. Her eyes, cold and venomous, locked onto me. She picked up the phone, her voice still clinging to that fake sweetness, a twisted parody. Jacob, you've misunderstood, she said. The things in the basement, they were just spiritual rituals. I never meant to hurt you. I stared at her, my gaze unwavering. Don't call me your son, I said, my voice low but sharp, cutting through her lies. You tried to kill me, Serena. Stop lying. She stiffened, her lips trembling, but her eyes burned with raw resentment, as if she hated me for ruining her monstrous plans. "You don't understand," she muttered, her voice weakening, as if she finally knew the truth was undeniable. I stood, slowly setting the phone down. "I didn't come here to hear excuses," I said, looking from my father to Serena, my voice resonating with a newfound strength. "I came to say I'm done with you both. This family, it died a long time ago. I'm not your son anymore. And I'm not your family." My voice cracked slightly, but I pushed through it. "I'm choosing my own life, and there's no place in it for either of you." I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. I heard my father call my name, his voice breaking, but I didn't stop. Stepping out of that prison, I breathed in the cold, free air, feeling as if I'd shed a burden I'd carried for years. The visitation room door closed behind me, and I knew with absolute certainty it was also closing on my past. I was no longer chained by the memories of my father, Serena, or the craftsman house steeped in darkness. Ahead of me lay an open road, a new path, and for the very first time I felt truly, unequivocally free. From that day forward, I severed all contact with Samuel and Serena. No letters, no calls, no mention of them. They became a part of my past, a deep, ugly scar on my heart, but no longer something that defined me. I focused on the present, on what I could build, on a dream I'd nurtured for years, becoming a counselor to help young people, like the boy I once was who grew up in broken families, to find the light within themselves. I enrolled in a graduate program in psychology at a university in Portland. The months that followed were a blur of classes, part-time shifts at the counseling center, and late nights hunched over my desk, scribbling notes. There were moments of exhaustion, yes, but whenever I looked at my grandparents' letter, carefully tucked into my notebook, I found the strength to keep going. "Live true to your heart," they had written, and I was determined to do just that. The $2 million trust fund was a significant responsibility, but I managed it carefully. A portion covered my tuition and living expenses, ensuring I could focus on my studies without financial worry. Another portion was invested long-term, following the advice of a financial advisor Mr. Collins recommended. I didn't want the money to be just a number in a bank account. I wanted it to mean something. So I established a small fund in my grandparents' name, the Henry and Eleanor Fund, to support children who, like me, grew up without a complete sense of home. Each thank you letter from a charity felt like an extension of the boundless love my grandparents had given me. With the remaining money, I bought a modest house in the Portland suburbs. Not the craftsman house, forever filled with painful memories, but a cozy, welcoming place with large windows overlooking a small garden. I painted the walls a soft blue, hung photos of my mother, grandparents, and great-grandparents, and slowly, intentionally turned it into a true home. One afternoon, I called my mother, my voice hesitant but full of hope. "Mom, I want you to move in with me. This house, I want it to be our home." There was a pause. Then I heard her laugh, tinged with tears, through the phone. "Jacob, my boy," she said, "I'll be there." And so she did. She moved in, bringing her old stories, her home-cooked meals, and evenings spent reminiscing. For the first time in years, I felt I truly had a family. Not bound by blood, but by unwavering love. As the months passed, I found an inner peace I hadn't known was possible. The nightmares of the basement, the cloth doll, the jar of blood, they no longer haunted me. I stopped waking up in the middle of the night. I no longer feared thinking of my father or Serena. Instead, I found joy in the simplest things: brewing coffee for my mother in the morning, an inspiring class at school, an afternoon helping a child at the counseling center share their pain. My grandparents' memory became a guiding light within me. Their love, preserved in their letter and old photos, was strong enough to remind me that true love still existed, not from my father or Serena, but from those who chose to love me unconditionally. I also learned lessons no classroom could ever teach. I realized that blood doesn't always mean love. My father, once my entire world, chose greed over me. Serena, with her fake smiles and dark schemes, taught me that family isn't about shared blood, but about those who make you feel safe and truly loved. I learned to let go of hatred, not because they deserved it, but because I refused to become like them, consumed by greed or malice. I chose forgiveness, not to erase what they did, but to free myself. My journey came to a quiet close one afternoon as I sat in my small backyard garden, watching wildflowers sway gently in the breeze. I thought of the boy, Jacob, once frightened and alone in that craftsman house, believing he was unworthy of love. That boy had grown up carrying scars, yes, but also a profound new belief. The past may leave its marks, but it does not dictate the future. I smiled, breathed in the fresh air, and felt a new beginning. Not loud or showy, but brimming with quiet, resilient hope. My story didn't end with applause or fanfare. It ended in stillness, with the sound of birds chirping and sunlight filtering through the trees. In that moment, I knew I had finally found myself. Not the abandoned son, not the target of a monstrous plot, but Jacob Caldwell, a man ready to live with an open heart, despite the darkness that once tried to consume me. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like an outsider or faced a deep betrayal, I want to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you'd uncovered such a chilling secret in your own home? Let me know in the comments below. Your stories, your perspectives, they truly matter.